It's the first day of May and also Labor Day here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Arirang News. I'm Lee in Seoul. The two Koreas are taking incremental steps towards reconciliation after last Friday's Inter-Korean Summit. South Korea started taking down the loudspeakers that broadcast messages and music across the border with North Korea today. And according to a defense official here in Seoul, North Korea seems to be taking down its speakers today as well. Seoul has stopped its propaganda broadcasts ahead of the summit in a sign of goodwill, and Pyongyang had followed suit. And before we sit down with an expert to talk more about this, let's first head over to Devin Whiting at the News Center for the latest headlines at this hour. Devin.
Hi, June. Well, it looks like last Friday's summit made an impression on U.S. President Donald Trump. He's now suggested that the truce village of Panmunjom would be a good venue for his own meeting with Kim Jong-un in the coming weeks. He said the border area as a meeting site would be representative, important, and lasting. Kim Yo-sun tells us more.
The truce village of Panmunjom, where the leaders of the two Koreas renewed their commitment to establish peace on the Korean peninsula, is being considered as a possible venue for the U.S. North Korea Summit, scheduled for late May or early June. After meeting with his Nigerian counterpart at the White House on Monday, President Trump said the inter-Korean border would be an excellent venue for the summit.
We're looking at various countries, including Singapore. And we are also talking about the possibility of the DMZ, Peace House, Freedom House. And there's something that I thought was intriguing. There's something that I like about it because you're there. You're actually there, where if things work out, there's a great celebration to be had on the site, not in a third-party country.
He also tweeted on Monday that the Peace House or the Freedom House on the inter-Korean border could be a more representative, important, and lasting site than a third-party country. Until late last week, Trump had said potential summit locations had been whittled down to two countries, including Singapore. But it looks like President Trump discussed the idea of holding the summit at Panmunjom during his phone talks with South Korean President Moon Jae-in following last week's Inter-Korean Summit. After their conversation, which Trump hailed as long and good, he also added that things are going well and the time and location of the meeting is being set. If Panmunjom is finalized as a venue for the first ever meeting between the sitting leaders of the U.S. and North Korea, the inter-Korean border, which has long been a symbol of division, would likely become a true symbol of peace. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in spoke on the phone earlier today with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He asked the UN chief to join in the process of verifying that North Korea is committed to denuclearizing and to peace on the peninsula. According to the Blue House spokesperson, they spoke for half an hour, during which the South Korean president asked that the UN observe whether Pyongyang is following through on its promise to close down its main nuclear testing sites. He also asked Guterres to monitor the process of implementing last Friday's agreement between the two Koreas, specifically transforming the current demilitarized zone into a peace zone. President Moon asked for the UN's support for the Panmunjom Declaration, to which Guterres replied that it would need the UN Security Council's assent, but he is willing to cooperate in the process of establishing peace on the Korean peninsula. And the Blue House says that if Panmunjom were chosen as the venue for the Washington-Pyongyang summit, it would serve as a meaningful site and mark a new milestone of peace. The comments by South Korea's top office on Tuesday came in response to President Trump's recent tweet, which hinted at the border village as a possible venue for his meeting with Kim Jong-un in May or early June. Meanwhile, a Blue House official said Monday that President Moon Jae-in prepared and handed over some materials related to his vision for economic cooperation between the two Koreas to his North Korean counterpart Kim Jong-un during their summit. Apparently, President Moon said he gave Kim a booklet and a thumb drive containing a presentational video about the so-called New Economic Map initiative of the Korean Peninsula, which promotes economic cooperation between Seoul and Pyongyang. Starting today, South and North Korea are stopping the distribution of propaganda leaflets to each other as part of the cessation of all hostile acts, as stipulated in the summit agreement. And for that, Seoul's Unification Ministry has asked for private groups that send leaflets to cooperate. Some groups have said they'll keep sending leaflets to the north to try and improve human rights. The government stressed that the cooperation of these groups is crucial to lowering military tensions and guaranteeing the safety of South Korean citizens living near the border. And the government left open the possibility of police intervention if conflicts arise. Human rights groups in South Korea have used balloons and plastic bottles to send flash drives and leaflets across the border. And with the Inter-Korean Summit now over, focus turns to the North Korea-U.S. Summit. It's a meeting said to have been agreed to by President Trump against his advisors' wishes, and there's concern about a lack of preparation, not to mention the possibility of one or the other side walking out. Our Kwon Jang-ho spoke with the former U.S. ambassador to South Korea, Kathleen Stephens, who shared her thoughts on the situation.
Ambassador Stephens, thank you for having us here in your lovely home.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Welcome to California.
What has been your reaction to the developments over the last few months? There is some argument that say Trump's attitude towards North Korea have helped these developments happen.
Well, I think certainly this new and very unconventional, to put it mildly, American president has been part of the mix over the past year. I don't think anyone can say with certainty what has driven Kim Jong-un to make some of the decisions he's made over the last few months. But what we do know, obviously, is that he made a decision to open up a path, which Seoul then embraced and has moved forward with. And now, of course, President Trump making this rather surprising and quick decision to say, all right, let's start at the top and see where we get from there.
What concerns do you have towards a Trump-Kim summit?
I have that conventional concern that this is a summit that is happening without, if you like, the traditional preparation. You know, I've been involved in many summits in different places over my career, and you know, generally, the notion has always been when your two leaders get together, usually you don't want too many surprises. You know, you've worked out the deal pretty much. This is very different, and when you have two leaders meet without things kind of set, it's got to be a fairly broad framework, and then you've got to implement, and that's going to take time. Whether it's shutting down nuclear programs and getting inspectors in, whether it's getting to work on resuming some economic and energy cooperation. And I worry about, I guess, shortcuts. You know, what if there's a deal that maybe satisfies some core issues of America first, but that is not taking into account the security concerns in Seoul or Tokyo?
Currently, there is no ambassador, U.S. ambassador in South Korea. Especially as an ex-ambassador, how much of a concern is it for you?
Well, not only as an ex-ambassador, but as a former American diplomat, I am very concerned about the weakening and, frankly, just the lack of staffing in diplomatic positions in general. And we feel it, I think, particularly keenly when we're looking at an issue like Korea, where something unprecedented is about to happen. A sitting American president has said that he's going to meet with the leader of the DPRK. So you kind of want to have not only your A-team in place, you want to have a sense of continuity, and that's the other thing that you hope that over time, you know, your senior officials and diplomats provide.
How important is South Korea's role in this current situation?
One of the things that I actually find most significant and hopefully encouraging about what's going on now is that the Republic of Korea has played such an important role as a catalyst and as a shaper. But with that comes some risk and some responsibility too. And I think it makes it all the more important that Seoul and Washington have the best possible communication, frankness, coordination of their efforts, because we do have to be mindful that it's a very common strategy in any negotiation to try to wedge drive, to try to split, and we do have somewhat different perspectives, but we have to make sure that we stay together, because I also think that's another kind of fundamental principle of making some progress on these long-standing issues of reconciliation and peace on the Korean Peninsula, is that it has to be very Seoul-centered, and it has to be very centered on the alliance.
Thank you again for your time and your insights, and let's do hope for the best for the summits.
The world is watching, yes. Let's hope for the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And in other news, America recently granted exemptions to its new tariffs on steel and aluminum to key allies. Those were due to expire on Monday, but just hours before the deadline, the White House announced that the exemptions would be extended. It also confirmed that for steel, South Korea is getting a permanent exemption. Kim Hye-sung reports.
South Korea has been granted permanent steel tariff exemptions from the United States. This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump authorized modifications to the U.S. steel and aluminum tariff measures. In a statement Monday local time, the White House said it has reached a final agreement with South Korea on steel exports, which are part of the amendment to the South Korea-U.S. free trade deal. Seoul earned its permanent exemption by agreeing to quotas that will cut its steel exports by about 30% based on its average annual shipments to the U.S. between 2015 and 2017. The exception does not apply to aluminum tariffs. The White House also said it has reached agreements in principle with Argentina, Australia, and Brazil concerning the tariffs, the details of which will be finalized shortly. The U.S. is extending negotiations with the European Union, Canada, and Mexico for 30 days, postponing the temporary exemption deadline to June 1st. The EU has said if it loses its exemption, it will retaliate with its own tariffs on U.S. goods imported to Europe. In March, President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel imports and a 10% tariff on aluminum, but granted temporary exemptions to some of its key allies. The prolonged exemptions for Canada and Mexico come as the U.S. is working to renegotiate NAFTA, the free trade agreement between the three countries. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
As part of efforts to bring back peace on the Korean Peninsula, South Korea started to dismantle propaganda broadcasting loudspeakers set up along the borderline today. Now, this comes as the two Koreas agreed last Friday to stop all hostile acts from May 1st and to get rid of the means to carry out such acts, including broadcasting propaganda through loudspeakers and distributing leaflets in the areas along the demilitarized zone. And military officials here in Seoul said today that North Korea also seems to have started taking down its own loudspeakers. These loudspeakers go way back in time, with South Korea having started broadcasting propaganda messages to the north using the loudspeakers in 1963, with only a few breaks since then. The current loudspeaker broadcasts restarted in January 2016 in response to North Korea's fourth nuclear test. Now, South Korea's defense ministry, meanwhile, assured the public that the military is maintaining its utmost readiness and preparedness while doing its best to carry out the measures of the Panmunjom Declaration. And to tell us more about all this, as well as the latest developments regarding North Korea, Dr. Bong-young-sik, a researcher at the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies, joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Pleased to be here.
All right, so turning off these propaganda loudspeakers along the borderline, I mean, what does this mean for the two Koreas?
Well, the loudspeaker campaigns by both sides have been the part of the reality for a long, long time. Your report mentioned that the South Korean government started this campaign in 1963. Lifespan of almost all South Koreans have been accustomed to this as a part of the reality surrounded by extremely tense military tension on both sides. So termination of this loudspeaker campaign by both sides is very significant in terms of taking the first step toward a meaningful reduction of tension and the confidence building measures by both militaries. And the information campaign has been a very important part to bring meaningful changes inside North Korea, because information dissemination about the outside world has been very critical threat to the stability of regime, but at the same time granting many opportunities for North Koreans inside North Korea to seek for better lives and freedom outside the world. So we have to wait and see. But according to recent research, North Korean residents are already very capable of having access to the information about the outside world.
Okay.
One North Korean defector actually laments that use of USB have been part of the daily life for North Koreans since many years ago. So North Koreans are not totally blind to what's really going on outside world. So the upside is that by terminating these loudspeaker campaigns, the reduction in tension will be achieved. The downside is that it may reduce the information penetration inside North Korea. And North Korea has not issued a formal apology for the death of 46 sailors in Cheonan incident and the bombardment of Yeonpyeong Island. And the operation of loudspeaker campaign has been tied to North Korea actually delivering this message of apology and the responsible actions for the family members of the deceased. So we have to wait until North Korea would take proper measures to address these two issues.
And this is not the first time that the two sides have stopped these broadcasting propaganda.
Right, so we all cross our fingers that this time we don't need to resume these loudspeaker campaigns.
All right. Now we have the high-level talks between the two Koreas coming up. What can we expect the two sides to discuss in that meeting?
The groundbreaking announcement of the Panmunjom Declaration has two components. One is the advancement of inter-Korean relations, which can be tied to or separate from any progress of the denuclearization talks between North Korea and the United States, which is the other part of the Panmunjom Declaration.
Yes.
So two major events are big litmus tests in terms of gauging the genuine attitude of North Korean leadership to not only advancing the mutual interest of the both Koreas, but also moving forward with so-called complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So I'd like to highlight two events. One is the high-ranked government-to-government meetings to realize the large scale of reunion of separate families in celebration of the Liberation Day, which is August 15th. And the Minister of Unification, Cho Myung-gyun, said that this will be the first agenda for negotiation by Pyongyang and Seoul, because preparing for this event in a big scale would take a lot of time and coordination.
Right.
So I'm hoping that this time it wouldn't be just a small scale reunion of separate family members. There are still 50,000 registered separate family members alive in South Korea waiting for their turns. And another big event to come is the high-level military-to-military talks and negotiation on the conventional arms reduction and the confidence-building measures, especially in the West Sea, so that we can prevent accidental clash at sea, and how to reduce the tension at the demilitarized zone. And the Panmunjom Declaration actually contains the clause to stipulate meetings between the Minister of National Defense from both sides. So we have to see how urgent and genuine North Korean government and military would be dealing with these two upcoming events.
So aside from those two big events coming up, the two Koreas also agreed in the Panmunjom Declaration to establish a liaison office in the Kaesong area. When will we see this happen?
Well, it's part of the big plans agreed by both sides to enlarge the scope of reliable and official communication channels. The hotline has been already established between Mr. Kim Jong-un and President Moon Jae-in. And as a side note, at the banquet after the announcement of Panmunjom Declaration, Kim Jong-un actually asked this question to President Moon Jae-in, how that hotline, telephone actually works.
Oh, okay.
So President Moon Jae-in said that it is not as simple as you just lifting the phone and call me. You have to go through your, official staff members to get connected. And there was a kind of lighthearted moment of the summit meeting and the banquet. Hotlines are between two top leaders, and the hotlines to be established between two militaries.
Right.
And the liaison office in Kaesong Industrial city of Kaesong is also another enhanced means of communication and trust building for both sides. And it also has a very symbolic value, because resumption of Kaesong Industrial Complex will be one of the defining moments, epitomizing the progress on the front of denuclearization, because the resumption of Kaesong Industrial Complex is nearly impossible if existing economic sanctions will be lifted in accordance with comparable denuclearization effort by North Korea.
Right.
So establishing the liaison office in Kaesong is a symbolic gesture that if things related to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula would go well, then there will be a day that Kaesong will be revitalized.
Right, and we'll see business back in Kaesong Industrial Complex as well, I guess. Now, eyes are also on China because it's been playing quite a big role as a closest ally to North Korea, but also been cooperating with South Korea ahead of the summit. So now that the summit has taken place, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi will be visiting North Korea on Wednesday to meet with his northern counterpart Lee Yong-ho, while President Moon Jae-in will also be speaking to Chinese President Xi Jinping this week to talk about the summit that he had with Kim Jong-un. So what can we expect from China from here on out?
Well, I personally think that China is busy cranking up its effort to make up for the lost chances, to exert its influence on moving the ball in the right direction to bring denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Because when South Korean President Moon Jae-in, amid controversies and concerns, braved to make a state visit to Beijing in December 2017, prior to the North Korea's declaration to active participation and support for Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games and engaging in large-scale inter-Korean relations activities with South Korean government. And having the cold shoulder by Xi Jinping, governor of China, was quite disappointing to the Moon Jae-in government at that time.
Right.
So had it been more active support and participation by Xi Jinping, governor of China, for South Korea's initiative to bring everybody to the table to settle the differences in peaceful and diplomatic manners, then Chinese government would not have been in such a rather desperate position to maintain its own share of influence on the current affairs. Because in the Panmunjom declaration, there is a commitment expressed by both leaders to have the trilateral or the four-party talks to put an end to the Korean War and replace the armistice agreement of 1953 with a peace treaty. And the phrase, 3 or 4 parties to participate in this transition would be a source of concern for China because you have two Koreas and the United States, then China may or may not be invited. And during the Korean War, China only sent, according to its own official position, not official armed forces, but only voluntary armed forces. So China's participation in the upcoming major changes is not 100% guaranteed. So I guess Foreign Minister Wang Yi wanted to first hear what actually was talked about and agreed between the two Korean leaders at April 27th, directly from the Korean government, North Korean government. And second, explaining China's own position on how to move from armistice regime to a more sustainable peace regime.
So we had some positive report coming from U.S. President Donald Trump about the summit, and we heard the reports on how the tourist village of Panmunjom may be a possible venue summit for Trump.
He is enjoying his time.
Right, Trump-Kim summit. But at this point, we're wondering, though, how far do you think discussions have gone between Washington and Pyongyang over North Korea's nuclear issue?
Well, we have to wait and see. Let's see what happens. I'm borrowing the favorite phrase, one of the favorite phrases of the President Donald Trump. But we have to wait and see what happens. But according to some South Korean governments who praised the April 27th Panmunjom Declaration in response to criticism that the clause, about the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula as ambiguous and open to different interpretations. They justify such a clause by saying that there must have been very solid mutual understanding about how to proceed toward the actual implementation of the concept of the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula between Pyongyang and Washington. Otherwise, then South Korea and North Korea would not have agreed on such expression subject to different interpretations. At the same time, had it been too detailed agreement on denuclearization of North Korea in the Panmunjom Declaration, they would have undercut the bargaining freedom and the leverage of the United States toward North Korea. So in respect for the United States bargaining leverage in the upcoming summit meeting between U.S. and North Korea, it is intentional for South Korean government to have such an expression on denuclearization. So if the theory is correct, then there has been a lot of and very solid unofficial mutual understanding between Washington and Pyongyang already made.
All right, well, let's hope to see more positive developments up until the Trump-Kim summit. Thank you so much for your insight today.
You're welcome.
And that does it for now, but stay tuned to Arirang for more news updates throughout the day. As always, thank you for watching and goodbye.
Do you know Seoul? On the banks of the mighty Hangang River rises Asia's most dynamic city, a hub of technology, culture, and finance. Seoul, the heart of Korea. Hangang River, the main river that represents Korea, runs through the central part of the Korean peninsula and flows east to west. It originates from Taebaek, Gangwon-do Province. Seoul, reduced to ashes during the Korean War, it is now home to the world-class brands Samsung and Hyundai. It's the pulsing metropolis where Psy sang his mega hit Gangnam Style. Seoul is the gateway to Asia, located between Beijing and Tokyo, and is a hub for trade and finance. Discover the subtle beauty and dazzling brilliance of Seoul, a 1,000-year-old capital which is on the cutting edge of technology, offers a glimpse of the future, and is a place of deep kindness.
K-Beauty Talk.
놀랍죠?